When people hear the word fracking, of course they think of a well and a well pad. And they think of this high-powered water and chemicals going down under the earth and blowing up the shale. And in fact, that's fracking. But fracking has a larger meaning to it that includes all the other attendant technologies that necessarily go along with fracking. One of them is industrial scale strip mining for silica sand. And that has to be part of the conversation about fracking, because you can't do fracking without it, right? So essentially, the water and the chemicals that we use to blow up the shale is really just the delivery agent for the silica sand. The silica sand is what really allows the gas to flow. So silica sand is kind of the Samson of sand grains. It can withstand what scientists call lithostatic pressure, which is the weight of the earth, right? You have a mile of earth on top of this cracked up shale. And for the gas bubbles to flow out, you have to prop those cracks apart, like with little door stops, and those can't crumble under the weight of the earth. Otherwise, as soon as you release the pressure, the hydraulic pressure, the cracks are going to close back up again and the gas is going to be trapped. So it's silica sand that serves that role. So essentially, the water is like a fire hose that blasts the grains of sand into the cracks, and they are now going to be held open forevermore, for all eternity. Those doorways are open, and whatever volatile chemicals are inside of the shale can now have an exit. Those can include methane, which is what we're after, that's what natural gas is. Can also include propane, butane, ethane, radon. All these things also come up with the gas, all right? So two things. One is, where does all that silica sand come from? And the answer is, it comes from our neighbors to the north. So north of Illinois is Wisconsin, is Iowa, is Minnesota. And in those states, they're not on the shale, but they are on sandstone. That's their bedrock. And so the hills, the coulees, the bluffs all along the upper stretches of the Mississippi River are now being loaded into rail cars, loaded onto barges, and taken to the fracking fields of America, where they become a weapon of mass destruction to destroy the bedrock in somebody else's community. But in the communities where all that sand is being excavated, those people are being subjected to many of the same conditions that the people who are on the receiving end who live on the shale, right? We're talking about thousands and thousands of truck trips. We're talking about endless 24/7 noise pollution, which we know leads to, in children, leads to learning disabilities and poor academic performance, and that kind of noise pollution also related to risk for high blood pressure. We know that we're exposing people to diesel exhaust, and because we're washing and processing the sand, we know that we're exposing people and their water supplies to chemical wastes. We're silting up streams. We're essentially doing what they call hilltop removal. So we're turning the landscape of Wisconsin into what it looks like down here in the flatlands of Illinois by simply blowing up these sand deposits, shoving them into cars and taking them away. And in the process, filling up the air itself with silica dust, which is a problem because silica dust is a known lung carcinogen. So it also causes silicosis. It's not the sand grains you can see that are harmful. It's the microscopic particles that you inhale deep into the business end of your lungs, where it triggers, like asbestos fibers do, an immune reaction that can lead to either silicosis or, in some cases, the kind of DNA damage that leads to lung cancer itself. We have never exposed the general population to silica dust. We've exposed people who work like as sandblasters, right, which tend to be healthy, robust, younger men. And we know exactly how much silica dust such a 150-pound healthy man can be exposed to before he's in trouble and needs a dust mask for the 8 hours a day he's working. Have we ever exposed a population of pregnant women 24/7 to silica dust? Do we know what silica exposure does to a 4-year-old? No, we have no idea. And yet, all of these folks who are living in the sand hills and the sand counties of, Aldo Leopold's Wisconsin and similar areas in Iowa and Minnesota are being exposed to silica dust. And not surprisingly then, when those folks learned that this week this huge decision was going to be made in Illinois that would possibly open Illinois to fracking, a regulatory bill that will, make no mistake about it, serve as the starting gun for large-scale hydraulic fracturing for shale, gas, and oil deposits. Those folks immediately went to work, and within less than 24 hours on Memorial Day had created a letter which they sent to every single member of the General Assembly of Illinois, along with, they asked me to hand deliver a copy to the Attorney General as well, Lisa Madigan, which I did today. And that letter was signed, I mean, it was a 2-page letter, and it was 10 pages altogether, because 8 pages were simply signatures of groups, of communities, of individuals in 3 states where there are sand deposits, begging the legislators of Illinois to declare a moratorium on fracking here, because should they move forward, almost certainly the demand for the silica sand, which will be shot into the deep heart of the earth here to hold those cracks open, the demand will go up, the price will rise, and the pressure on their legislators to open up more land for industrial, destructive, large-scale strip mining for silica sand will go up even further, and the misery that they experience and the devastation will increase there. So fracking means a lot more than just the safety of the wellbore and its integrity, a lot more than just the moment at which we're cracking open the bedrock. It refers to the whole process. It starts with the mining of silica sand along the upper reaches of the Mississippi River, and could also turn inside out the banks of the Illinois River, because we also have not just shale here in Illinois, we have some of those same sandstone deposits. That's what forms the beautiful and unique landscape around Starved Rock State Park, which is being threatened by strip mining for silica sand for fracking operations. And as a result, the Sierra Club is all involved in a big lawsuit. And yet the Sierra Club is also endorsing the regulatory bill for fracking, which makes me think that there's something wrong with that picture. There's a disconnect. It's a sort of schizophrenia, because we need to think about the whole process and all the attendant technologies, right? So you can't be for a regulatory bill that creates a permissive legal environment for large-scale fracking and be opposed to opening up a state park that has silica sand that's needed for fracking. Those two things, there's a breach there. There's an inconsistency, right? And in a similar way, fracking refers to all the other things that come up along with the methane. So methane's what we're after. It's natural gas, and when most people hear natural gas, what they think about is the blue flame on their stove that makes the tea kettle whistle, or they think about the whoosh sound of their furnace kicking on, right? That's natural gas to most people. But about 30% of the natural gas that we use in this nation is not used, we don't light it on fire for energy. It's used as a chemical feedstock. We make stuff out of it. So all of the anhydrous ammonia fertilizer has natural gas as its starting point. So when you see those white tankers being pulled behind tractors in the spring, as we do now here in Illinois, what's in there is a form of nitrate fertilizer synthesized from petroleum, and in this case, that form of petroleum is natural gas. So natural gas makes anhydrous ammonia fertilizer. And so the fact that we have dumped this year more anhydrous ammonia into the Mississippi River Valley and made the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico even bigger and even worse. The fact that nitrate fertilizer, which is a known reproductive toxin and possibly linked to cancer, is found in drinking water wells throughout the Midwest, that's because of cheap and abundant natural gas. So when we have a huge supply of natural gas, we then have a huge supply of anhydrous ammonia fertilizer, and we have a huge amount of nitrate going into the ocean and creating dead zones. That's also part of the story of fracking. Another part of the story of fracking is ethane, propane, butane. These are also volatile hydrocarbons that come out of the shale along with the methane. And so ethane is one of our building blocks for plastic. The reason that there is a huge ethylene cracker being planned for a community north of Pittsburgh is because we have an excess amount of ethane, and we're going to turn that into plastics. Not because we have a human need for plastic, but because we're solving a waste disposal problem for the energy industry, and because profits can be made, right? So here you have a community in northern Pennsylvania where there is already problems with air quality. They have ozone levels that are already in non-attainment, meaning ozone, powerful cellular poison, shrinks and constricts the lung development of children, contributes to asthma, contributes to heart attack and stroke risk in adults, and so forth. That's already a problem in this community, and now we're going to add one of the most polluting industries, an ethylene cracker on top of it all. And we're going to do that because we have this abundant supply of ethane coming out of the ground because of fracking for methane. All that ethane will get turned into plastic. So we'll now have cheaper and more abundant shower curtains. We'll now have more plastic bags. We'll now have all of these things that we're told as individuals to reduce, reuse, and recycle. But we're now going to make more of it because we're fracking. Where does all that end up? Well, most of the plastics eventually ends up in the oceans. The world's oceans are literally downhill and downstream from everything else. And so we know already out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we have microscopic bits of plastic in the water column that by weight exceed by a factor of 6 the amount of plankton there. And we know those bits end up getting incorporated into the food chain, into the fish that we then ourselves eat. So that's already a problem. That problem will be made worse by cheap and abundant ethane. So when we turn the earth inside out via fracking, we end up creating an infrastructure that alters the landscape and has all of these other consequences. And so it's like an octopus with many tentacles, and those are all part of this creature that goes by the name fracking, right? And so all of those consequences need to be considered. And when you look at them all together, what you see is misery in the sand mine communities in the upper Midwest. What you see is misery in the Pacific Ocean because of the plastics. What you see is misery in the Farm Belt where nitrate fertilizers are poisoning people's water supply. And then of course you have all the misery in the communities who are forced to live near 6-foot flare stacks and drill pads in the actual gas fields themselves. That's all part of the story of fracking.